All right, so I'm going to get started. So good evening, everyone, again, and welcome to What I Did with My Degree. My name is Lauren Fowler. I'm the Academic Advising Coordinator at CUNY SPH and one of the staff advisors. And I would just also like to introduce my colleague quickly, who is within the chat. Matt, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, I will be in the chat just reminding you to submit questions there. So if anyone has any issues or technical things coming up, you can always contact me in the chat.
All right, thank you so much, Matt. So tonight we're going to hear from public health professionals and some of our CUNY School of Public Health alumni who hold a degree in community health. And before we start this panel, I just want to briefly give some context to the MPH Community Health degree itself. So the program focuses on social and behavioral sciences and public health. Students are provided with different competencies, and some of these competencies are assessment, community engagement, program development, grant writing. And again, this is to promote health in urban communities. And so if you are seeking more information, we do recommend that you visit our CUNY SPH website. Tonight's panel, it's going to include some moderated questions followed by Q&A towards the latter part of this. And as Matt mentioned, you can feel free to put your questions in the chat as well. The chat is also open for any comments, and we'll have a portion where you can raise your hands and ask questions then. So now I would like to introduce and hear from our panelists. Each panelist will introduce themselves and just briefly explain their daily responsibilities and their current role. So any of our panelists can start. Naomi, if you'd like to start.
Thank you, Lauren. So my name is Naomi Legros. My pronouns are she, her, and I graduated from CUNY in 2020. I'm currently a research coordinator at NYU Langone Health, and I work on a research study that focuses on environmental exposures and fertility. So it's a reproductive health study, and we're basically observing participants through the life course, and we are collecting biospecimens to analyze in the future how these environmental exposures impact obesity, asthma, and other factors that my principal investigators really delve into. This is the second research study I've been a part of. I previously was at Columbia University Medical Center, where I worked on a community participatory research project focusing on depression and anxiety in faith-based African American communities. So thank you for having me tonight.
I'm happy to jump in right after. So hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to join this panel. I'm very excited to chat with you all about my time at CUNY and what I'm doing right now and what I'm working on. Hi, my name is Andrea Isabel Lopez, and my pronouns are she, her, ella. And I graduated with an MPH in Community Health 2021. I currently have two roles. So one of them is with the Center for Innovation in Mental Health, which is a CUNY research center. And there I am the Harlem Strong program manager. So I do a whole lot of stuff, but I basically support all of the day-to-day operations of the project. I coordinate and lead the community advisory board. And I'm also very actively involved in the recruitment efforts and coalition efforts. And then in my other role, I am a civic science fellow with Ciencia Puerto Rico, where I focus a little bit more on health and science communication.
Great. And I think I'm the last panelist. My name is Karen Ortiz. My pronouns are she, they. And I graduated with my MPH with in community health with a specialization in maternal, child, sexual and reproductive health. I graduated in 2022, so pretty recently. Right now, I am the community engagement supervisor for the sexual health clinics at the Bureau of Public Health Clinics through the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene in New York City. Essentially, what the role entails is kind of injecting as much community feedback and perspective into the clinical work so that, you know, we're collecting that information from them that informs the way that we provide the services. It helps us, you know, determine spaces for capacity building and also how to be more equitable in the dissemination of both education and the clinical services. My professional passion has always been in sexual and reproductive health. And in previous roles, well, right before this role, I actually did work at CUNY with the vaccine literacy campaign. This was at the height of COVID. So that pivot, I think we all did a little bit of that and maybe continue to do that in you know, the public health world that we live in now, which is very different than it had been ever before. And then before that, I spent a few years at Planned Parenthood of New York City, and then after it merged of Greater New York. And I'm excited to talk about my experience or any aspects of being a student here with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our three panelists for your introductions. Karen, if you don't mind briefly just mentioning again from the beginning when you graduated and your degree, because it kind of cut in and out, like you froze for a second. So I'm not sure if students heard.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I graduated in 2022 and my degree was in community health with a specialization in maternal child sexual and reproductive health.
Okay, thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
And so moving forward, Karen, I have a question for you. As a recent graduate of CUNY SPH, how would you describe your graduate school experience?
Very busy, like the busiest time of my life ever. So just knowing what you're getting into. No, busy, but also in multiple ways. I went between 2020 and 2022. So I was going to classes and, you know, surviving the pandemic like everyone else and everything that that entails, and also working to like try to financially sustain my studies and my life. So very busy. And I think that the program prepared me for, well, time management for sure, prioritizing tasks, but also it prepared me for a new context for, you know, what, like how the work is going to be done in this like post, though not really post COVID world, right? Like that everything now has this lens. And at the same time, how to inject multiple contexts to center intersectionality. Because when I was, you know, getting my MPH, this was super highlighted. Oh, I'm in my office and there's no one else here and the lights just turned off. I'm sorry. I'll get up in a second. But yes, and just, you know, the equity piece and like racial justice being an ongoing public health crisis and bringing that to the center, and COVID highlighting that. I'm gonna go turn on the light now.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Karen. Yes, please come out the dark.
Yeah,
thank
right.
you.
Thanks.
Okay, so while Karen adjusts her lights, Naomi, in your bio, you mentioned your long-term plans to address health inequities and dismantle social determinants of health in marginalized communities. So what would you say sparked your initial interest in public health, and how did you get started within the public health field?
Yeah, so in undergrad, I was in Africana Studies and American Studies double major. So I wasn't really privy to what public health was until my senior year of college, where I had to fulfill another requirement for Africana Studies. And there was a course called Race, Ethnicity, and Health. And I thought, oh, that would be great to just learn more about the history behind, you know, health in the United States and the racial component that comes with that. And in taking the course, I think it just opened a new avenue of a career option for myself, because I knew with an Africana degree, I didn't want to teach, and I was still trying to figure out how can I best utilize this degree. And then so taking that course really ushered in like this new opening for me. So after graduating, I ended up working at a reproductive health nonprofit in New York City, and they focus on abortion, contraceptive care, and early pregnancy loss. And they train providers to provide those care. So just getting that experience being in a nonprofit space, also having repro health as my entryway really solidified that, you know, reproductive justice and public health was an area that I wanted to continue honing my skills in and building a long-term career in.
Thank you, Naomi, for such a very detailed response and a very informative response. Andrea, would you be able to expand on your current position at CUNY SPH as Harlem Strong Program Manager? Excuse me, as a Harlem Strong Program Manager. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, happy to. So for context, I don't know if everyone's familiar with the Harlem Strong project. So the project and the program really came to be during the pandemic. We were seeing, as I'm sure you all know, that the pandemic hit communities that were already marginalized the worst, and rates around mental health, specifically depression and anxiety, were through the roof. And we were getting this feedback from all of our community partners. We also did a needs assessment to assess what's going on and what Harlem residents felt, and the results were kind of alarming. Some of the rates around like depression and anxiety tripled, which is not something you really want to be seeing. So we started to brainstorm how to best address this, and identified that a big gap right now is that the system isn't speaking to itself. So primary care providers are on one side, behavioral health providers are on another, faith-based organizations are on one side, CBOs, you know what I mean? Like that no one's communicating with each other. So our goal is to create a coalition where everyone is at the table, and we have like community residents, leaders, and basically everyone at the table to create this referral network where we can try to address some of these higher rates of depression and anxiety that we were seeing. So in my role, specifically as program manager, I do a lot of that coalition building and more of the, I guess, engagement component of it. One of the broad areas that I manage is the Community Advisory Board, which is a group of community members and leaders. And we also have some people from the city, government representatives, people from CUNY. And during those meetings, we provide a space for one, we give them like updates of where we're at in the project, but also allow for space for feedback. So we create activities during those meetings to be sure to get their input about our next steps. So we are being as community informed as possible, and very much like adhering to community-based participatory principles. Another thing that we are doing is we're also actively recruiting organizations to form part of that coalition. We're doing like a very heavy push to include primary care sites and housing sites, because we also have a research component of Harlem Strong. Harlem Strong is a monster of a project, so I'm not going to get into a lot of details. But basically, we're doing a big push for recruitment, also of faith-based organizations, with the goal of having as much diversity and representation in that coalition. And also, like, recruitment isn't like we're doing it now and we're stopping. This is very much ongoing. So if we identify another organization a year from now, we'll still be able to invite them. So we're trying to be as flexible as possible and not like step away from a lot of the rigidity that's common in like public health projects of like this scope and scale. And then you also end up managing like the day-to-day things like emails that pop up, or like presentation invites, or just meetings, IRB stuff, the day-to-day mundane, more boring things. But I guess the bigger, I spent a lot of my time on the recruitment and then the Community Advisory Board.
Thank you. And so for some of those who are just joining, would you mind answering, as a graduate of CUNY SPH, what actually attracted you to this particular position?
So I started with CIMH, so Harlem Strong is a project of the Center for Innovation and Mental Health. I started with CIMH for my capstone project as a master's student while I was doing my MPH. So at this point, Harlem Strong was still like in the making. So I saw like Harlem Strong kind of form and saw them apply for a grant, like all of that. So I got involved with them for the capstone project. Then when I was nearing the end of that, so a year when I was like basically graduating, I applied for the Margaret E. Mahoney Fellowship from the New York Academy of Medicine, and then got some funding to stay on with them during the summer. And I was able to continue to do a lot of the needs assessment work that they were doing at the time. And also I translated a bunch of their stuff in Spanish, which to me, as a Puerto Rican, was very important to do. And then that's where the funding came in for Harlem Strong, and they just onboarded me as a manager. I think a lot of what attracted me, I guess, was just the staff that I was working with on a day-to-day basis, like the other managers and coordinators. Like the team was really, really cool. And like we had like similar values and principles and approached public health in similar ways.
Excellent. And so you mentioned being Puerto Rican. I know that many within this panel this evening or within this chat may not know that you were born and raised in Puerto Rico. So how has that shaped your public health experience?
A lot. So my introduction to public health like was in Puerto Rico. Like Naomi, I didn't have like a full grasp of what public health was when I was like in undergrad. So I kind of accidentally fell into it when I like got that like for my first like full-time grown-up job after undergrad. So I was working at the Institute of Statistics for a CDC project called NVDRS, the National Violent Death Reporting System. And I worked with like a lot of MPH folks and PhD folks and just kind of learned from them what public health was and like learned on the job. I think sadly also a lot of what shapes my public health perspective is seeing a lot of the things that don't work in Puerto Rico. So seeing like the lack of funding, how public health in Puerto Rico tends, like it never mentions prevention. It's always like an afterthought, which is a very frustrating thing because it's like very anti-public health in a lot of ways. And also there's like this thing about community engagement being like so performative and like just for like the evaluation report that you're doing saying that you engage communities, but you didn't. So a lot of those experiences and insights that I had like on the job and like frustrations, I kind of took with me into the MPH program.
Into the program itself. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And thank you for being so transparent and answering those questions.
Happy to.
Thank you. So Karen, would you be able to tell us what sparked your initial interest in public health?
Yeah, I think similar to a lot of folks, you know, your lived experience definitely informs that, and the different identities that folks hold. I mean, just looking around, I mostly see names, but they're different kinds of names, and I'm imagining that most of us, if not all, are New Yorkers, and so that means that we are all very different and exposed to a lot of diversity and a lot of diversity in so many ways of thought, in practice, in so many different kinds of people. And you know, your lived experience is you're an expert in that. And so one of the things that I felt like I was doing by getting involved in public health was bringing my experience with my identities, and no one else has all of that, right? No one else is Karen, no one else is Andrea or Laura, you know, no one else is us. And so there's always going to be some little niche or someone that maybe could be spoken, you know, about or to or with, that isn't getting a seat at the table. And that's really what I've always wanted, just bring more seats to the table that I felt like weren't being occupied.
I love that. Thank you, Karen. So this is for all three before we eventually venture into more of the Q&A portion. But would all three of you say that your initial backgrounds compelled you to move forward in the realm of public health and more specifically community health? And what do you think, for those who are alumni, are some important takeaways from an MPH community health degree program for any of our prospective students? And anyone, in any order, if anyone.
I'm happy to jump in, but no, go ahead. I feel like I talked for a lot, so go ahead.
So yeah, to answer the first part of that question, absolutely. I think, yep, as Karen, like, native New Yorker. So I am a daughter of immigrants. My family came here from Haiti. And I think just growing up in an immigrant community from Washington Heights, so you get to see in real time all the different barriers that immigrant communities are facing in terms of accessing healthcare, accessing food equity, just a whole of many different intersections in which immigrant populations are not getting the full access to live healthy, dignified lives. And I think, in community health, there's this course that I took about immigrant health, and they talk about the healthy immigrant paradox, where second generation, third generations are more likely to experience more adverse health outcomes than your immigrant families who immigrated here because you've acculturated into the new society and have faced more weathering in your body, more traumas and more distress that impact your mental and physical health. So I think having those firsthand experiences, seeing all those different traumas that impact my family's health and my community's health, definitely added a layer to the real world experience in alignment with the courses that I was taking at CUNY. Can you remind me of the second part of that question? Lauren?
So for any of our, prospective students within this chat, if there's any important takeaways that you would want to discuss, if you are alumni of the MPH Community Health Degree Program.
Oh, yeah. So CUNY, I think, is special in the sense that, it has a social justice lens to the MPH program that others in New York City or across the country don't, I guess, specialize in or put into practice as much. And I think that's what compelled me to the program in the first place. And because of my background in undergrad as well, I wanted to put that social justice to practice and not just say that we're trying to, create a space at the table to invite communities to. It's more like, okay, no, how are we as the institutions, as the researchers, taking a step back to listen to the communities, to let them tell you what they need and not just impose on them what you think they need. So I think the SPH program did a really good job of trying to reassess your role as a community health practitioner so that you're utilizing all the skills you get from the program, but not isolating the community who experienced it firsthand.
I'm just gonna plus one.
That you have mentioned. Sorry.
Well, I'll say I'm just gonna plus one what attracted you to CUNY, the social justice component of things.
Yes, thank you. So I was pointing out that I did think that was a very powerful statement in itself, kind of addressing the social justice piece. And again, not only mentioning that it's within the program, but really wanting to move forward and utilize such or advocate for such. Sorry, Andrea, I don't know if you were answering the questions as well. It was kind of a two-part question. If you'd like
you can go ahead. I just felt like I wanted to plus one what Naomi said, because you look at a lot of different MPH programs when you're applying, and sometimes you get a bad aftertaste when you look at them because they seem very performative and kind of shallow in how they approach public health. They don't really target social determinants of health, for example, in a truly honest way. And I think we're seeing now a shift more towards prioritizing like community voices and lived experiences, and how public health is like made and done.
Excellent. Thank you, Andre. Yes. Karen, I didn't know if you also wanted to, respond to the two different questions. One is kind of, again, addressing important takeaways from MPH program. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, piggybacking off of what Andrea said, I remember when I was looking for places to take my classes to start my MPH degree, of course, social media is always like recording everything you think and do, and suddenly you get ads for all these schools. And I remember something about the keywords of what I was searching for. Then I kept getting these like prompts on like my Facebook or on Instagram or something that was like, study intersectionality at Yale, like come to Harvard for like, and I was like, really, is that the place that's gonna show me what like community work is and like how to really get in the trenches? And I was like, no, that's not going to be the place. And that's not to say that these places don't have something to teach, but for what I wanted and what I was looking for, it wasn't going to be the place for me.
Thank you again, Karen, for a very honest answer to the questions I'm currently asking, and listening to the three of you share and divulge information to our participants. I also wanted to know, and this is again addressed to all three of you, all three of you seem very passionate within your respective roles and work. What are some of the challenges, though, that you're currently facing within your careers that some of our future students might encounter or can anticipate?
That we're currently facing, or that we faced as students?
It could be two-part, Karen. Thank you. So I was more so thinking currently. What are some of the challenges you're currently facing within your respective fields? And then, if time allows, I can surely address it to the scope of a student.
Yeah, I think part of the challenges when you're doing anything with public health is funding, right? Like, there's never enough funding, and the resources are often like, it's a grab bag of resources. And so one way that I try to get past that is that, I mean, it's a lot of the work that Andrea and Naomi are doing. It's like working within coalitions or working with partnerships and like really leveraging the resources that you have. I may have, I mean, just to make it simple, I may have like all of the pens, and Andrea may have all of the paper, and Naomi has all of the, like, whatever. And it's like, we have to talk to each other. We can't like do our work in silos. And really, there's no way to get this done if you think you're going to work alone. So really trying to break down those silos well beyond your comfort zone has been really helpful for me.
Yeah, I would want to say funding is definitely one that's like very important and like impacts like, our well-being. I do think now, I hesitate to say after the pandemic because we're still seeing impacts of the pandemic, but this like during/after the pandemic, there has been definitely an increase in public health funding. Hopefully that is like a permanent thing and not just like a fad, because we are still like reeling with the side effects of COVID-19. But funding is definitely a thing. And then another one that I think kind of ties into what Karen mentioned around coalition building is sometimes there's like a lot of bureaucracy like involved in doing this type of work, and like you need to talk to this person who needs to approve it, and then this other person needs to approve it, and like a simple ask takes all of a sudden a month to get done. So a lot of the time the work can feel slow, which if you're like on the and you're seeing like the urgency of the work that you're doing can be frustrating. So it takes like a mind shift of like, well, it's like incremental changes and you'll eventually get there. You might not get there in a week. It might take 6 months, but you'll get there eventually. So that's definitely, I think, a challenge, like an emotional challenge that we kind of have to deal with and like measure.
I think for me, working in research, working in an academic institution, I think it's sometimes it's difficult knowing like the harms that institutions have caused in communities of color and marginalized communities. And you can take all the HIPAA trainings, you can take the city trainings and ethics and learning about Tuskegee, but then how are you actually putting it into practice? So going from Columbia to NYU is just like, okay, these two ivory towers notoriously have done harm and are trying to rectify said harm. And you're participating in research, and it's just like, okay, sometimes leadership still looks at these communities as statistics, as numbers, in order to justify getting funding, in order to get things done. And where I struggle sometimes, I am a qualitative person at heart. I appreciate the stories. I want to know the anecdotes that influence health impact. So it's just like, you can say we have X amount of withdrawals in the study, but I want to know what are these causes? The number doesn't mean much to me. It's just like, what are these stories that are backing up these decisions to make a study go left or go right? So I think just working in research is just like, trying to have that balance, and also as a Black woman, not trying to be the only one who has to call this out every time, because that becomes an emotional burden as well, because you want to have support from leadership and all different tiers of the bureaucracy who can see it, and it not just being like, okay, we have that one Black employee, she'll be the one to identify all these different factors that go into ensuring that a research study is equitable, because at the end of the day, that's an additional job on top of what I was hired to do. So, and that's just me being transparent.
Yeah, same here. I've been you have to translate everything now, and that's not part of my job description. It's yeah, you're preaching to the choir.
Well, again, I truly appreciate all of the transparency and the honest answers. I think for currently, the last question I would just ask again, all of you, is what is some initial advice that you would give a student just starting this journey, whether you're speaking from where you are currently or if you're remembering when you first started as a student, but again, some advice that you might, whether before COVID, after COVID, advice that you might give a student who's starting this journey?
I mean, I wish I would have taken mentoring more seriously when I was in grad school. I think I take it more seriously now, and I latch on to like mentors in like my professional world and coworkers much more. But I feel like when I was in grad school, because I was working full time and studying full time, I didn't prioritize it as much, or didn't want to like, oh my God, I'm bothering this person with like all of my questions and like asking them for coffee or whatever. I think I would have liked to be like more proactive on that side of things.
Okay, so more mentorship, and that's understandable if you're balancing, as you're saying, working in school, that might not have been the initial focus, but thank you for that as a key takeaway. Naomi or Karen, do you have some that you would like to share as well?
I think standing here now, I think prospective students who are looking into MPH programs, you have almost 3 years of firsthand experience looking at how the United States, the world has been taking seriously or not as seriously the pandemic. So I think, and Andrea might have also started before COVID, but I think I entered the program in 2018, would have never guessed in a million years that I would have ended the program with New York City as the epicenter of the pandemic. It transformed how I approach public health. It transformed how I think about community, and it transformed the way I thought about how public health is still seen as an individual responsibility as opposed to a community effort, which I think is the pandemic has shown that we have a long way to go. So anyone who's going into a public health program has to really, in my opinion, have to be community oriented. It's at the root of ensuring that everyone's able to be safe, take care of each other, and to reduce inequities.
Yeah, and I think that my only advice, I mean, not my only advice, but a piece of advice that I could give would be to remember that you're essentially trying to work yourself out of a job. You're trying to essentially make sure as much as possible that no one will ever need what you provide, which is very much the opposite to the way careers and our society functions. Like everyone wants to be in high demand and needed and like a hot commodity, but that's not what you want in public health. You want the opposite of that. So just keeping that lens that you're working yourself out of a job, and that sadly the work will likely always be there and you still have to try. Like even if it feels insurmountable or it looks like there's no way, just continuously keep trying to work yourself out of one.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, yeah, we can.
Okay. So for some reason, I can't. I can't hear. Okay. As I work on audio issues, but you can hear me. Your thumbs up, you can hear me? Well, that's great. So let's carry on. All right. And Matt, thank you, Shirley,
Yes,
for raising your thumb too. So I'm glad you all can hear me. All of a sudden I can't hear. So I'm gonna try to figure that out. Matt is co-hosting with me. So he will help me. I might sign out and sign back in. But with that being said, when I was able to hear our panelists, they were sharing a lot of information. And I think that it's a lot of important information and there's still more to come. So to those of you who have submitted questions, we do have those questions, which I'm going to access for you. But also, if you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Matt is also going to assist me with seeing if there are questions in the chat. But I'm going to try to sign back in momentarily. So again, if you do want to start posting some of your questions in the chat, by all means, do so. Yeah, so Matt, if you can hear me, I'm gonna sign out and come back in. It's been great, everyone. I'll be right back. And let me just try real fast.
All right, so while Lauren is coming back, I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but I do, maybe some of our participants want to. I just want to make sure you can use the raise hand feature if anyone wants to ask their questions, kind of live to our panelists. That might be a good way. We've already heard some great, questions already discussed. I see one has already come in from Joshua. Between Karen, Andrea, and Naomi, you can maybe jump in however you want here. I'll read it out loud. So question from Joshua here. How did you manage getting internships while working full-time and studying part-time? And there might be two ways to think of this. I mean, you can maybe think about if you did internships on your own, or if maybe the fieldwork component that was part of the degree might be a good way to think about this. So maybe we'll start with Karen. I see you're nodding your head, so I'm going to start with you, and then Andrea and Naomi, you can jump in if you have questions.
Yeah, sure thing. So one of the things that was really helpful about the community health degree is that there is a year of kind of like field work. And we did research. I mean, for my team and I signed up to do research with a partner organization that was doing collecting data with their doulas. So it was at the time a doula pilot program that was providing free doula services to new mothers or new parents in Flatbush, Brooklyn. And they served a number of different kinds of families there. And that was really great on the resume to get my foot in the door, either on the community-based organization side of like, I want to work with your agency on this way, or on the research side, if I wanted to, I think that in both and in various aspects of that work, I could pivot my resume to be helpful in allocating those kinds of jobs. I also was lucky enough to find a role, a part-time role. I did it kind of backwards to your question. I was going to school full-time and working sort of part-time. It turned a little bit into full-time, but I was working through the school at the vaccine literacy campaign. And so sometimes those opportunities do present themselves. And I always tell people, and this is maybe not advice that people want to hear, but talk to the professors, like take their time, like even ask questions, even if you don't have very deep questions, do ask the professors, like just any curiosity you might have, or even for advice. It'll just at least show investment, and that'll look good, that the professors show that you care. It'll make you stand out in the class. And also sometimes those opportunities come up for them where they need someone to do a little bit of like, working on a side of research, or they're doing something and they need something typed up, or they need someone to manage the calendar of something that like may not take so much time, but it's like a little bit of a way that you can sustain it, and it's already with someone that you have a relationship with in the school. So it kind of helps in both ways. So that was one way that I did it.
Great, thank you so much.
I was gonna go more on like the managing like side of things, like time-wise and organization-wise, because I worked full-time and then I studied part-time. I took 3 courses instead of 4, which is somewhere in between part-time and full-time. But for the capstone project, in community health, the way it works is that you are put into groups, and then you have like a list of organizations or projects that you can work with. So your capstone project, the time commitment, you're not really taking a class, you're just using that time to partner with the organization. So you don't have like a 3-hour block of time to like use in a week. You just have to partner with the organization and do the work. And yes, you have like things to hand in, but you don't have that like block of time that you need to commit to, which I think facilitates a little bit of how you manage to like divide up your time. I think there's also a culture at CUNY where, I don't want to say everyone, but like a lot of the people that I interacted with and that graduated with me and that were in my cohort, everyone had a job. So we're all juggling a lot of things. So I think professors are pretty understanding and flexible. If you have like an emergency, or if you have like a conference to travel to, or like something that came up at work, as long as you're like forthcoming and honest with them and don't tell them like, an hour before something is due. As long as you have like that side of the things where you're like, know what the syllabus is and know what's due, professors are pretty flexible and they know that the type of student that goes to CUNY just works full time or works, you know what I mean? Like we're just juggling a lot, so they're used to that.
Great. Naomi, did you want to add anything on internships or?
Matt, I think your audio went out.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I was just asking Naomi if you wanted to add anything on internships or do you, yeah.
Yeah, so I actually had the opposite experience. So like Andrea said, CUNY is very accommodating to full-time workers. It's why courses don't start any earlier than 4:30 p.m. at SPH. I made the decision that I was going to be full-time student, no work. I from undergrad to the master's program, it was a 4-year gap. So I wanted to just get back into being a full-time student. So the first year I was able to like knock out all the core courses I believe in the first semester. And then because I spent that whole first year just devoted to studies, the second year I was able to balance finding outside opportunities and completing the remainder of the credits that were required of us. So I actually did do my field work at the Center for Innovation in Mental Health, working on their Suicide Safer Care project, which was working with primary care providers to conduct the Patient Health Questionnaire 9, which is a 9 items screener to identify depression in primary care settings. And like I believe the statistic was 40% of individuals who end up ending their life had seen a primary care provider a month before doing so. So they were really trying to bridge that partnership with primary care providers to start identifying risk factors that might make individuals at higher risk for suicide or suicide ideation. And then because I didn't end up doing my capstone based on the field work, I had other opportunities to look into other internships with help from Zine Lynn Roberts, who's amazing and was an amazing mentor. I was the second sexual and reproductive justice fellow at Planned Parenthood in New York City, which merged into Greater New York. So I also did a lot of research on maternal and infant mortality in New York City, focusing on Black diasporic populations, and just trying to understand what Planned Parenthood as an institution can do to help with those disparities, and whether or not they should take central role in that or get platform other grassroots organizations to continue facilitating that work. So yeah, I think because I managed my time differently, like the first year was mainly for school, and then the second year allowed me to branch out and equally divide my time between school and internships and fellowships.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's one of the things, that makes CUNY SPH unique. And Lauren and I know this intimately because we work in advising, and we have students moving through these programs at all different paces, right? Many full-time students, it's 2 years, but then, the vast majority of our students are part-time. Some of them are 2.5, 3.5 years. So we do build that flexibility in. You do lose a little bit of, I guess, the cohort model. The folks you start with might not be the same peers you're graduating with, but you do have more options in terms of sequencing, out the degree. As more questions come in from the audience, feel free to, again, put those in the chat. Lauren, I know you have some, we had asked that when at registration for people coming today to submit questions. So Lauren has some of those as well that came in ahead of time. So I'm going to turn it back over. Lauren, hopefully you can hear me.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you everyone for your patience. I can hear. It's a good evening. Other thing I want to remind you of is, yes, you can put questions in the chat, but you feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourselves if you have a question that you would like to ask our panelists. As I have returned, I know that there was a question on internships, and it sounds like, again, that the panelists are sharing their different personal experiences as they're going through their graduate programs and the internship component. I know that one of the questions that was submitted is, from your MPH, what would you say are some of the skills that you have gained, and how have you actually utilized those within your respective careers? Naomi, if you would like to start us off. And
Sure,
then,
thanks, Lauren.
Karen.
I
Thank
think
you.
a huge skill that I took away from the community health department was communication, learning how to communicate with stakeholders, with community members, with principal investigators, just different levels of participation within a research study. When I was at Columbia doing the CBPR study, I managed the Community Coalition for Mental Health, and it was with a lot of community members in Harlem, clergy, um, different stakeholders, and a lot of what I had to do was create fact sheets for like BIPOC Mental Health Awareness Month and all different types of mental health awareness capacities, focusing on depression, anxiety, COVID-19, et cetera, et cetera. So, and also doing like health information is making sure that it's at a 6th grade reading level, making sure that what we're publishing, it really hits the, I guess, the health barriers that the community that we're working with is facing. So if, for example, since it was Harlem, you know, what's the food insecurity looking like in Harlem? What's the access to mental health resources in Uptown Manhattan, et cetera, et cetera. So just having that preparation at CUNY allowed me to really put to practice what we were learning in the textbooks. So that was something that I really enjoyed being able to practice a lot.
Thank you, Naomi, for essentially reiterating what you learned within the classroom setting, that you were really able to implement that within your career and moving forward. And as you mentioned, being able to communicate with stakeholders and different entities in that realm. So thank you again for highlighting that. Andrea, if you'd like to add your response as well.
Sure, I think Karen mentioned this in one of her responses. A skill that you definitely gain, especially if you're studying full-time and working part-time, is just time management and organization, and like learning to prioritize your time and task. And that's a skill that will help you in any job. So you get really good at it if you're especially managing a lot of things. Another skill that I think I definitely have learned in my MPH and have taken with me to work was something that actually Lynn Roberts does in one of her classes. She has a way of teaching that it just forces you to unlearn and relearn a lot of the things that we are like socialized to. So you come out of that class being like questioning like how projects are made, who is at the table, who has decision-making power, like who's missing, like how are we engaging with communities, like are we being like, is it a mutually beneficial relationship, or are we just like doing what we think is best for them without even consulting them? So that's not really a skill, like I can't think of a word for it, but there's like a reflexivity and a reflection and a learning component to it that I think is very beneficial. First, as a human being, like it just makes you a nicer person, but also like in work and especially in public health, like having that flexibility and that humility to like check yourself and check your privilege and like unlearn and relearn things that you need to is definitely an asset that I gained from Lynn Roberts specifically.
Thank you, Andrea. I think that you have thoroughly answered the question. I know you were trying to articulate it within a certain way, but thank you again for your response. And Karen, if you had something you wanted to share too.
Sure. I mean, I second all of the responses that folks have had, and will also mention that, like, many of you might already have dabbled in public health in your work. I know I had a little bit under my belt when I came in as a graduate student. And so for me, I learned some of the things that were holding me back from being, promoted. So things like data collection and funding like grant writing, and also like when people give you money, they want to know what you're doing with it. So you have to like prove everything that you're doing and that you're spending everything well. And there were some classes where we had actual samples of like, this is how you write a grant. This is how you ask for money. This is how you make sure you keep the money you get. This is how you report on this budget or on the activities. This is how you prove success, you know, like, or whatever the outline of success is. And that was super helpful. And I carry that with me everywhere now.
Thank you, Karen. I recognize some of the names in this chat as well. So again, if you do have any questions, don't be shy. Feel free to unmute. This is an opportune time to speak with our phenomenal panelists. But until we have any more questions, so I know that the three of you have talked in different ways about networking or speaking with stakeholders or different forms of connection and the importance of such. And so if you were to give advice, what would you say are some of the best ways that a new student, as they're moving into their new career, would be able to network?
Networking really starts at SPH, in my opinion. I think because we're uniquely, like, majority are part-time students, full-time employees, they are, and a lot of them are working in some aspect of public health, you're able to get like firsthand networking experience, learning more about what they do, learning about new organizations that you probably never heard of before, trying to align what you hope to work in after you get the degree with what your peers are already doing. So I think just, you know, networking with your classmates will get you that first foot in the door to what you hope is your short and long-term goals in public health. So really hone in on the SPH community first. And I can even give an example. One, like when I was managing the Community Coalition of Mental Health at Columbia, one of the members was a fellow SPH alum who was in my track. So you just never know where you're going to be networking again after SPH with your peers. So I think just building those connections really impacts you in the long run.
I completely agree with such. I'm sorry, was someone else going to say something, or?
I mean, the only other thing that I can add that I think helped me, just because it looks like I'm the only one that's not a New Yorker here, was that whenever I interacted with someone and they mentioned an organization or agency that they worked at, I would make it a point to like look at their LinkedIn, like look at the website, get to know them. Which seems like a not active networking, but when you are I guess like following everything on LinkedIn, you see when they have a new job post, you get to know their director. You just have like this knowledge that you absorb in like a kind of passive way because you're sort of just scrolling through LinkedIn. That I think was very beneficial to me. But my experience might be unique because I'm not from here. But that I found that to be very helpful.
Thank you, Andrea. And I really admire your experience since it is so different from just New York, someone from New York City. I know that throughout our conversation this evening, I've done a lot of referencing towards prospective students or students who are interested in attending our institution. But I do want to also address the population of students who are towards the end of the program or who are about to graduate. But we have a hand. So I'm going to first allow Nyla, you're more than welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Awesome, thank you. Naila, hi everyone. Thank you so much for, no problem. Thank you so much for your time, and to the panelists. Karen, not to put you on the spot, but definitely would love to hear about your experience with networking, because you were a student during the pandemic, when I think of traditionally the ways of networking are like the student spaces those weren't open. And I think that that's still, I'm not sure now, I know for a period of time while I've been in the program, they haven't been open. So I'm curious what networking might have looked like for you when you didn't necessarily have some of the traditional spaces where networking might occur.
Yeah, I think that in some ways, I think it was kind of lucky that all of the networking turned virtual because it expanded my capacity to attend. So there were a lot of engagements, like community engagement had to go through a transition from like going out and giving out flyers and tabling and shaking hands and kissing babies to like, we're all behind the computer. It's all Black. It's just a name. There's nobody's, but you don't know anybody. You don't know the students. You know, only the professor, the professor's camera is on, and then just like, I don't know who anybody is. So it did take a little bit more inventiveness to be like, hey, we're in class together. I heard that you work at this place. Can you tell me a little bit about what that's like, or do you like it? Or even it's just like fetching about the class, like, oh, this professor, am I right? And then like getting in a little in that way. I also have just personally, I'm civic minded. So like there were a lot of like civic engagements, like community partnership meetings or like community board meetings where there were updates on this is what's happening in your neighborhood. And I mean, I'm personally invested in what happens in my neighborhood. How come my neighborhood doesn't have a COVID testing van and I have to walk to Bushwick to get one, you know, or like why, you know, in that time, there were things that everyone wanted to know, like who's getting what and why. And so attending those meetings and seeing the organizations, you know, saying their plans and sharing at the community meetings, like we're going to bring a mobile unit to a testing unit. We're going to bring a tent. We're going to bring, you know, there's a food pantry that's opening up and this organization is running it. And you get to see all the players in that way. There's so many meetings that happen beyond the community board too, that are of people trying to do the work. And so like, I know like ACS, for example, has so many different meetings in the communities that they have a lot of presence in. And that was informative to me, not necessarily because I wanted to work for ACS, but because all of the other agencies that were present serving the same populations also attended those meetings. And so that was another way that I still continue going to those meetings and listening in on like where they're moving and who needs what. And it informs still the way I do the work now.
Thank you.
Any other questions from our audience before I kind of go back into the question that I was going to ask? Okay, so we'll look for hands as I continue on. So as I was mentioning, I feel like a majority of our conversation this evening, I kept referencing prospective students or students who might be currently enrolled, but for students that are nearing the latter end of their program, what would you say were some of the steps or priorities that you focused on after you graduated from CUNY SPH or from your institution? In any order. Thank you.
No, okay, no, I can go really quick. Mine is small. I had to take time. So some people will take time off to focus on their work if they can finance that. Some people will, you know, try to balance both. My office light again. I'll just talk in the dark. It's fine. It's intimate.
Okay. We can see you. As long as you're safe.
Yeah, I know. I ended up doing something where I took time off after school. Like I secured a job and then just gave them a really late start time because I was like, if my bucket is empty, I will have nothing to give. And I didn't realize how much I had given working and going to school. And so I think a lesson was like, how are you most helpful to other people? And if that means you have to take a pause and make sure that like, are you okay? You just went to grad school for 2 years during a pandemic and worked through it.
A lot, yes.
Yeah, like take time. That was something I did, but it's different for everyone.
Yeah,
I bring up it.
I am like slowly trying to prioritize that. Because I think my priority was more like getting a better job or getting a job with like a better salary at that time. But now I'm like looking at applying to PhD programs. So I'm like actively prioritizing taking a break next summer before I start. It's like self-care is definitely important in this type of work. As Karen mentioned, like you're not bringing your best self to work if you are working on like a 20% battery. So that's something I wish I could have prioritized at the time. But yeah, my priorities at the time were like getting a job that like resonated more with what I wanted to do and just had like a better paying job at the time.
And I think, I mean, that makes a lot of sense too. I think to both of your points though, and being that we're about 3 years in within the pandemic, I do want to push obviously the wellness piece as an important factor in the work that the three of you do, and that everyone has a different, pathway or trajectory. Naomi, I think you might, or you were going to respond as well before I kind of talk about last words.
Yes, so I think I was in a unique position where my final semester again was when COVID was declared a pandemic, when New York City was the epicenter. Mm-hmm. So while my priorities may have been to find a job, since at that point I just had the fellowship at Planned Parenthood and it had an end date, the reality was I had to sit in the unknown for a while because there was job hiring freezes across the city. At that point in time, we weren't even so sure what the symptoms of COVID were. We were just taking it day by day. So where I had probably goals that I wanted to accomplish that last semester going into, graduation and post-graduation, it really was I had to take a step back and realize, well, I'm going to sit in this discomfort that is the reality of the world and just hope that I prioritize my mental and physical health to ensure that when there was that silver lining that we were going to be able to, start the job search again, that I had the capacity, that I was full physically, mentally to be able to start that job search. So I think, yeah, mine was just very unique because of when I was graduating from SPH.
Thank you, Naomi. Okay, we are, I don't know what the technical difficulties here, but we are nearing the end of this session. And again, we want to thank our panelists, but as we're coming towards the end, if there are any last words that our panelists would like to share, and we have obviously different prompts, but if there's anything that initially comes to mind that you would want to share with those who are in this evening's conversation. So Karen, again, any last minute advice for those who are within tonight's chat, but essentially just last words before we close out.
Sure. I think my last bit of advice would be also reflecting on the answer I just gave of like, I took a month off, like that's super privileged and that's something that not everyone can do, or, or even like, yeah, not everybody can do that. And so like checking yourself a lot while you're doing this work on what your privileges are, because you will always have some privilege that someone else you are attempting to work with doesn't have. I think especially growing up, a lot of the people, I mean, I'm born and raised in the Bronx, and a lot of the people that were doing this kind of work were like the well-meaning white ladies, or like, and like, that's all great. but also has opportunities for perpetuating harms that they did, I'm sure they didn't mean to. And so constantly questioning your intentions, going into spaces knowing that there is expertise already there, that you're not saving anyone, right? Like you're doing something that's not you're not giving anyone a handout. You're doing something that needs to be done, and you're tasked to do it, and you are doing it in the best of your ability because you can. And because you can, then you should. Not because they can't or because they won't, but you can, so you do it. And so just bring that, like, try to bring humility into the work as much as possible. And I don't know, maybe one day we will work ourselves out of a job. That's my hope. I want more time off.
Well, I think you mentioned a powerful statement, because you can, so that because the individual can, they should, versus waiting or looking upon others to do such work. So thank you, Cam, for expressing that. And Andrea and Naomi, I'm going to change the question a little bit. Why, from your experience, should a student apply to CUNY SPH?
I think, and I touched on this before, I think the social justice lens in which we approach theory, praxis, real life approaches to public health is very unique. And I think because CUNY at its core is a city university, and you're reaching individuals from all different walks of life, whether they are native to the US, whether they're immigrants of all different experiences and intersections. So I think you are more likely to interact with the same types of people that you're going to go out and do community work with once you complete your degree. So I think CUNY has the foundation already to give you the tools that you need to succeed post-graduation, especially if you choose to do the community health track and you want to do community-based work. And I think in general, why CUNY? I think, it's accessible in many ways, from cost to location. And I know it's in Harlem, and I think a lot of their projects do focus on the Harlem community. So they're also pouring back into the community that they also take space from. So, and you see it in meaningful ways that I think other institutions could improve on. So that's why I think CUNY was the best choice for me, and I think would be a great choice for any prospective student.
Thank you, Naomi, for such a detailed answer. You've mentioned a lot of the social justice piece. It also sounds like you're including a little bit of concept of inclusion and diversity and being able to really utilize your degree in a multitude of different ways back within the actual community to which the school is derived from. So again, I do appreciate that detailed response. And Andrea, if you would like to share your response as well within these last few minutes.
I mean, I was going to go the same route that Naomi was, that I think the social justice component is very important. One thing that I would like to highlight is that that's not only present in like the curriculum, we actually have like community buy-in. Like right now at the city level, different universities in the city, when they're trying to do community projects, they go through us. And I have examples that I can think of that I won't be mentioning or throwing schools under the bus, but this is something that we're seeing, that the way to get into the Harlem community is through CUNY. And I think that speaks not only to the quality of the curriculum, but more of a practice what you preach situation, that our researchers and our research centers that are doing the work are actually doing it with community leaders and with community organizations, instead of like straight up assuming what they need and like telling you that they're doing community work. So I think that's something that a distinction that I think is very important to keep in mind, especially in the community health track. So that was like the only thing that I could add to Naomi's point, because I think our attraction to CUNY seems to be the same.
Amazing. Well, firstly, I would like to thank all three of you again. And on behalf of CUNY SPH, we want to thank everyone for coming out this evening. Just a reminder, there will be a brief survey that we would love for you to fill out at the end of, well, once this ends this evening. The main room will also be open if there's any last pressing questions, so feel free to go into the main room. And again, we hope that this was insightful and encouraging for you. For our current students, any questions or concerns, you can reach out to the Office of Career Services. For prospective students, definitely contact the Office of Admissions, depending on your questions. But thank you so much again, everyone. To our panelists, thank you so much as well. And as I mentioned, the main room will still be open if there are any last pressing questions. And have a good evening.